welcome along to Obsession Engineering, and I've popped down to the Wiz Norton garage to have a look at their Rotary Norton Manx Grand Prix racer. So this is the Rotary Norton in question, and this isn't Robert Dunlop's bike, or actually any of the other particularly big names. This one was raced by Neil Carey until actually quite late 90s, but now is part of the Wiz Norton team setup. They've got a couple of these, and over the last few years they've had some big name riders on them. Sean Anderson is riding this one this year. They've also had Josh Brooks on it, Jim Hines on it, and Steve Islop's son has actually ridden one of them back from scrutineering. But that's all the clickbait titling over with. Let's actually have a look at the details of the bike. This is a Spondon chassis with Norton's own 588cc rotary engine in it. There is a lot of information on these rotary engines on the internet, and there's nice diagrams and bits, but there's some big words: elliptical, epicyclic, and other stuff. Basically, there's a solid gear on the back of a base plate, and then the actual rotor sort of spins around inside it. To actually understand it fully, you really need to have a look at it. But basically, if you hold the rotor stationary in one position, the amount of volume of the combustion chambers, all three of them, is 588cc, but they are of course completely different to a normal four-stroke combustion engine, and so they have a different setup of everything else as well. So this bike has big radiators, so there's one this side, one the far side, and one in the nose cone, because these rotary engines generate a lot of heat. And this bit isn't a proper exhaust pipe. There's no combustion gas going through this section. This bit is an extractor. So the proper exhaust pipe runs out the front of the cylinder, out the front of the engine, runs up here like normal, and in this expanded area here there's a venturi. So the venturi sucks air through the extractor pipe. The air comes into the engine through this carbon duct at the front, so it runs up here through a bit of an air box down here, and then there's a oil injector that injects oil into the airflow and drags it through the needle-bearing roller in the middle of the engine, and then the actual airflow through the extractor pulls the oil mix out of the back of the exhaust, basically. So when these bikes pull over, they always look like they're smoking on the overrun. So when they're running, you get quite a lot of flames off them because it's pulling oil through all the time. And obviously it's not good for emissions, but it's a race bike, so these things don't really matter. The fuel tank will hold up to 24 litres of 105 octane petrol and two-stroke premix, because the sort of ceramic rotor tips in the engine need lubricating, and so they actually do use a two-stroke mix inside the petrol as well. So that's enough about the engine that, if I'm honest, I'm finding it slightly difficult to explain because it's complicated. So let's move on to the chassis. So from the front, the bike is now on Dimag wheels, because the period wheels would have been magnesium, and that isn't strong enough to ride around the Isle of Man nowadays. And the Dimag wheels have PFM brakes and sort of new spec Brembo axial mounted calipers to fit with the classic regulations. The forks are period correct WP, but they're not standard inside. Inside the forks are custom-made Nitron cartridges, so it's got modern damping, but in sort of period correct forks. The yokes, or triple clamps if you're American, they are period correct and they're offset adjustable. So at the moment the bike's running a 26mm offset, but they can also change the inserts in the frame, so you can actually alter the rake angle and the head position as well with the head inserts, but at the moment these are running in like a zero and neutral position, as would have been standard. So the electronics and bits on the bike are fairly new. So this is an NBE ECU onto a custom wiring loom, and there's switches for rain lights, obviously ignition and bits as well. You'll see this one as well has quite a big tank extension, so depending on rider preference and obviously size of the rider, depends on where they want to sit. And I'm guessing Sean probably has some fairly big kahunas, and so he's actually got a modified extended subframe. So the seat is further back. The GPS transmitter, basically so the organiser here at the Manx Grand Prix know where all the competitors are. They have the tracker on it, and that's slotted in where Sean's kahunas will fit as well. But good tank extension, that's on there as well. And for this year, the team have extended the swinging arm, so they've modified the swinging arm so they can run longer wheelbase as well and give the bike a bit more stability. In the background, the other side, there is a Nitron custom shock in there as well, and you see these oil pipes. They run to the oil tanks up the back that feed the oil into the front of the crankcases for the air to pull through and actually lubricate the main bearing. Rear sets look slightly agricultural, but they are period correct design, but they are obviously function over form. So back down the back end, we're on to talon sprockets, a Dimag 3-spoke wheel as well, and this bike's running on Dunlop D213 GP Pro tyres. They're not the big 200 section, this is a 180/60, because the bike was designed to run on a 5.5 inch rim, and there's probably not quite enough space in the swinging arm to run the big 200 section tyre, and they don't really make enough horsepower nowadays to really need a bigger tyre. And to finish off, we all love some stats, and so the bike nowadays doesn't make extraordinary horsepower, but back in the day this was a strong bike. They were capable of making about 145 horsepower, but in current spec are a little bit down on that, in the mid 130s range. But compared to the 4-stroke equivalent that could match on horsepower, these are only about 130 kilograms, so they've got quite a distinct weight advantage by probably about 30 kilograms over the equivalent OW01 or ZXR 750. And talking of output, engine output of course depends on RPM. The bike can rev to about 10,000, but here they're revving them to near 9 because it's a little bit kinder on the engine. But the crankshaft revs to 9,000, but the actual rotor is geared 3-to-1, so he's only doing 3,000 RPM. Only doing 3,000 RPM. Obviously the rotor's quite big diameter compared to the crank, so at 3,000 RPM the tip speed is still pretty impressive. So thank you to the Wiz Norton team for letting me come and poke around on their motorbike, and if you want to see this thing in action, well basically you've got to get yourself over to the Isle of Man next year for the Manx Grand Prix.